This episode of Harvey Brownstone Interviews is brought to you by the Harvey Brownstone Talk Show Blend Coffee, available at hollywoodblends.com. Everyone's saying it's the best coffee they've ever tasted. Why not give it a try and see for yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Harvey Brownstone, and today's guest is a highly popular and beloved actor, writer, and producer who became a household name for his portrayal of Jack Arnold, the stern, gruff but loving father of Kevin, played by Fred Savage, on the hit TV series The Wonder Years, for which he was nominated for an American Comedy Award for Funniest Supporting Male Performer in a TV Series. You also remember him as Jack Sullivan, Steve Byrne's father in another great sitcom, Sullivan and Son. And of course, he played Al Luongo, manager of the San Diego Padres in the best TV series ever made about Major League Baseball, Pitch. And he played Leonard Fero, the angry head coach of the New England Knights basketball team, in yet another TV series about professional sports, The Hoop Life. But beyond those iconic roles, our guest has brought us countless memorable performances on the stage and screen. You've seen him in many great movies, including Without a Trace, 9.5 Weeks, Stakeout, Another Stakeout, Independence Day, Wide Awake, Total Stranger, The Signs of the Cross, Miranda's Victim, and most recently, he played Tip O'Neill in Reagan. On television, in addition to the TV shows I already mentioned, he's appeared in dozens of classic series, including Hill Street Blues, LA Law, Cagney and Lacey, NYPD Blue, Touched by an Angel, ER, Law and Order, JAG, The Good Wife, Shameless, This Is Us, and many, many more. I'm just scratching the surface. He's also starred in a number of terrific TV movies and miniseries, including At Mother's Request, David, Quiet Victory, The Charlie Wiedemeyer Story, The Great Los Angeles Earthquake, Overexposed, Terror in the Family, and From the Earth to the Moon, to name only a few. And on the stage, he's appeared on Broadway in Lombardi and A Christmas Story, the musical. And off-Broadway, he's appeared in many shows, including Game Plan, Dinner with the Boys, and Just Another Day, all of which he also wrote. And if all of that weren't enough, our guest has also written 3 children's books in a series called The Godfather Tales. I'm delighted and honored to welcome the incomparable Dan Lauria to our show. Dan, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Harvey. That was a very generous introduction on your part. Thank you.
Well, I really only just scratched the surface. You've had such a career. I read that 2 of your mentors were Charles Durning and Jack Klugman, and your all-time favorite actor is Jimmy Cagney. Is that right?
Well, James Cagney was one of them, yes. And that was Charles Durning's favorite actor. And he gave a eulogy at James Cagney's funeral, and I gave the eulogy at Charlie's and Jack Klugman's. So I was very fortunate. Charles Durning, I knew from the first day I came into New York. We were both veterans, and we had a group. We were all Vietnam vets, and I asked him to come over. And the first thing he did was make us change the name of our group. We were the Vietnam Veterans Foundation. And he said, no, we're the Veterans Foundation. And he brought in a lot of great actors who were World War II and Korean veterans. And he introduced us to Joe Papp. And literally, Charlie saw everything I ever did. And when it was over, he would put his arm around me and go, all right, another 20 years, you'll be an actor.
When you lose a friend like that, do you ever replace them?
No, not really. What I've found lately are there some younger actors who I believe in, younger writers, and I've become like their Charlie Durning and try to help them get going a little bit more. But the business, yeah, I mean, you know, Harvey, the business has changed radically since when I began, you know.
For the better?
Oh, I don't think so. No, I think one thing that really barred the Charlie Durning were things like self-tape, mechanical things to alter performances, you know, and that only hurts the more talented. And it's hard to convince young people that how bad a self-tape is. One, you look like everybody else. You have the same background. You can't move around. But they don't know what it is to go in a room and win it over, because when I started with Charlie Durning, he started. We did a lot of plays where we didn't get paid, but we worked on our craft, and sooner or later you were in a hit, and an agent picked you up. Well, today young people are coming out of college not having even done a play. They made 10-minute movies, and you can. This is a true fact. You look in the year 2000, how many colleges had theater departments? Look at it now. Less than half say theater department. They say communications department. So it's all about technology now. So they don't know what it is to win over a room. It's one of the reasons why I moved back to New York from LA. I was very disappointed with our union's fight about self-tapes. I don't know why they're asking me and people in my generation to self-tape when we have 50 years of tape. Meanwhile, they have an offer out to somebody with a bigger agent, good actors. I'm not saying they're not good actors, but they didn't self-tape.
I would have thought you would be at the stage of your career where you don't even need to audition anymore.
That's not true with any big movie worth it. I mean, Tip O'Neill had fit because I knew Mark Joseph, the producer. But I have to audition for everything. And the last 4 things I auditioned with, the term now is put a pin in. That means you gave a great self-tape. Well, the last 4 that they put a pin in me, all 4 went to actors, again, very good actors who didn't self-tape, but they have bigger agents. Matter of fact, the last one I lost to was to F. Murray Abraham. And
he was recently on our show.
And a great guy and a great actor. And I wasn't born yesterday. I understand. Why wouldn't you offer it to him? But why did you make 30 of us self-tape?
You're right. Well, another thing about your friend, Charles Durning, I remember seeing an interview where he said that he was not a fan of all the cuts that take place when they're filming a scene. He was renowned for saying, every time you see a cut, a good actor's out of a job. Do you agree with him?
Oh, totally. Charles and Charlie was the best thief I ever knew. He knew every bit ever done in every old movie. He had almost 9,000 old movies. And it was the night he watched Heat, the movie Heat. And he called me over, and anybody who knew Charlie tell you he was a tough guy. He was crying. And I said, "What's the matter?" He goes, "Watch this." And I'm watching, and I don't get it, Charlie. What's going on? He goes, "There's not one frame where Robert De Niro and Al Pacino are speaking to each other in the same frame. It's all cut." Both of them even talk about it on Inside the Actor's Studio. And Charlie said, "I thought I'd be dead before I saw this." And I said, "What are you talking about, Charlie?" He goes, "Don't you realize if they'll do this to the 2 best, they're telling you they don't need us anymore." And I really became and I do a lecture at colleges, and I start with showing a piece of footage from a famous recent movie, and I go cut. And then I show Cary Grant, Rosalind Russell going around the desk for 3 minutes and 40 seconds with no cut. And usually the audience doesn't yell cut, they start clapping. I get a lot of notes saying, because of your lecture, I can't enjoy a movie anymore, a new movie.
I have to say that Charles Durning's comment really did affect the way I watch movies too. Now, you mentioned you're a veteran. You served as an officer in the United States Marine Corps for 3 years, from 1970 to 73 during the Vietnam War. In fact, you were a captain and a platoon commander near the Cambodian border. First of all, sir, thank you for your service.
Oh, my honor, yes. But I always like to correct that, because we had orders to go to Vietnam. We were stopped at Okinawa, and I only went into Vietnam for a couple of weeks. And then they told us, get those Marines out of there, because at that time they were pulling the Marines out. And I think they didn't want the people back here think we were redeploying the Marines. So I was lucky, whereas Charles Durning, he was the youngest man to land at Normandy.
Over the years, you've portrayed a number of military men or law enforcement officers. Did you make use of your military experience in the way you played those characters?
In some ways, yeah. There were my company commander overseas on Okinawa was his Captain Fulford then, but he became 4-star General Fulford. And I always thought of him. He was one of the finest men I ever knew. We politically, I don't think we agreed on anything. I'm so liberal, and he was so on the other side. But militarily and just as an honorable person, you know.
Now, your character, Jack Arnold, in the Wonder Years was a Korean War veteran. Whose idea was it to make Jack a Marine?
That, you know, a lot of people ask if I had any contribution to the Wonder Years, and that was my only contribution. The very first time we read through the pilot, I went to Neil Marlins and Carol Black and said, listen, I'm a Marine. Any chance we can make a Marine? They loved the idea, and they came back next day and said, okay, we can't be a Vietnam Marine because that's when the show took place, but we'll make you a Korean Marine. And it played a lot into each year. There would be some mention of his military service. It became a part of the show.
Oh, very much so. Now, I'm
Yeah.
sure you're aware, Dan, that The Wonder Years was the first TV show to have a Beatles song as its theme song with a little help from my friends, sung by Joe Cocker. Is it true that Paul McCartney made that happen?
Yes, from what Ken Topolsky, our producer, told me, they sent a copy of the pilot to Paul McCartney with the Beatles song. And he was kind enough to write back and say, I love your pilot, but we don't own the rights. Let me see what I can do. And then the next thing we know, Paul McCartney wrote back and said, they're going to let you use our song, but not our cut. And I contacted a friend who I think should sing it. Next thing you know, we hear from Joe Cocker, and that's how it happened. I never met Paul McCartney, but I sure would like to, just to thank him, you know.
Well, I hope we get him on the show, and then I'll make sure to convey your appreciation. Now, Dan, I'm just going to be honest with you. I have to say that a lot of viewers, including me, were not happy with the way the Wonder Years ended after sixth season. I mean, I checked the ratings. Your show was number 27 in the year it was canceled, which was still really high. Why did the show get canceled?
Well, that's all because of one person, Ronald Perlman, not the actor who's my good friend, but Ronald Perlman, who was the president of Revlon. They bought the rights to New World, and they sold everything off except the Wonder Years. And from what Bob Iger told me, they were trying to rob ABC. And Ronald Perlman actually tried to blame Ted Turner, who brought the subsidiary rights. But Ted Turner came out right away and said, listen, I would have bought 200 more. And then the quote from Ronald Perlman's office was, the amount of profit did not warrant another season. So we were very upset. And the writers, poor Bob Rush, our head writer, he was told while we were making the second to the last show that we're not coming back. So that's why the last show ended with that long monologue. Everything in that monologue was what you were going to see in the final year of the show. The show was always written to end when Fred graduates and gets accepted to college, you know.
Well, how did you feel about your character being killed off at the end?
Well, it was true to Neil Marlin's life, the creator of the show. His father died rather young while they were playing tennis. He had a massive heart attack. So I knew from the beginning that it was going to kind of end. That was going to be the end of the Wonder Years. I had a, you know, my father passes and I'm the patriarch. So, but there was talk about bringing back a revival of it where Fred would be married with 3 kids. Allie would be remarried, you know, and then every show he would go in the backyard and look through a telescope, and my ghost would be swinging on a fence saying, see, you thought I was a jerk. You're doing the same thing. And I thought that was a great idea. And so did Bob, but it never happened.
Well, you've played a lot of very memorable fathers over the years. Are you channeling your own dad when you do that?
A little bit. I'm not a dad, you know, although I'm on my 5th little brother from Big Brothers. And my godson, Julian, he's in his first year of college. So it's the reason why I'm broke. I always pay for their education, you know.
It's a good investment.
Yeah, no, but my dad was a lot like Jack Arnold, you know, very nice guy, went to work every day. He was a teamster, truck driver, you know, very much like Jack Arnold.
Well, one of my favorite episodes of the Wonder Years was the season 3 finale called Daddy's Little Girl, where you really had some great scenes with Olivia Dabo, who
Yeah.
played your daughter Karen. Did you enjoy filming that episode?
Oh, very much so, because it ended with her leaving and I giving her my duffel bag from the Marine Corps, saying, "This got me through. This will get you through." So, and
That
and
was a real moment.
that was my only contribution, was the Marine Corps thing. And I even suggested giving her something that I brought through the war. And then Bob came up with the idea of the duffel bag.
Yeah, that was a real moment. There's another great episode in season 1 called My Father's Office, where Jack takes
Right.
Kevin to work with him for the day. Was that one of your favorite episodes?
Yeah, I try not to watch myself. So I didn't really even see that episode till after we won the Emmy. I wasn't aware. I thought they submitted the pilot for the Emmy, but they didn't. That was the one they submitted. We got a lot of mail from father, saying thank you. Now my family understands why I'm so grouchy when I come home.
Why don't you watch yourself, Dan? Don't you want to see what we all see in you?
No, not really, because like I've watched all the episodes I'm not in, or ones I might only have one line, but I find I don't enjoy what I see, because in my mind I have something else when I'm doing the scene, and I'm never satisfied with what I do on screen. And I don't want to start editing myself. I don't want to say, don't do this, don't do that while you're working. I want to just let it flow. There were a lot of actors who were like, I know Henry Fonda, Jack Klugman said Henry Fonda would never watch himself. And I worked with Jimmy Stewart with the National Veterans Foundation, and he enjoyed watching the movies with his family, you know. And I asked him, I said, "Do you end up criticizing?" He went, "Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We all do."
I'm sorry you don't get to see what we see, because there's a reason why you've had such longevity in your career and such popularity. You know, when I think of you in Sullivan and Son, there's an episode called Who's Your Daddy, where Owen decides to find his biological father, and your character, Jack, struggles with abandonment issues. Were you
Yeah.
happy with the storylines they gave you on Sullivan and Son?
Yeah, that was an odd job, because I always felt like I was robbing the bank. I never had so much fun doing a show. You got to remember, we had 4 stand-ups, and me and Brian Doyle Murray, I'd be behind the bar, he'd be at the end. We were like the 2 critics on the Muppets, so we would watch all week. And on Tuesday, we would go, that ain't going to be in there. That'll be cut. That'll be cut. And every time you said something with 4 stand-ups like Steve Byrne, and Tom, things just kept flying out. So we laughed so much. And of course, when Jamie Widows directed, oh, it was just a laugh fest all the time.
Well, Sullivan and Son was canceled after 3 seasons. Pitch was canceled after only 1 season, even though it got really great reviews, very good ratings, considering
Yep.
that the show aired in the same time slot as The Sopranos. How did you learn to deal with the disappointment that comes from the cancellation of a TV show that you really enjoyed working on?
Yeah, that's very hard for any actor. It's hard enough when you have a bad show that's canceled, but when you have a good show like Pitch, I mean, I talked to Dan Fogelman, and I really felt that if Hillary had won, we wouldn't have been canceled, because it was a Fox show. He said, no, 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 it's entertainment news, 2 different things. But later on, when I talked to Dan, he said, you might have been right. Same stockholders, because we were putting a dent in Thursday Night Football, and no show had done that. And I thought it was an important show. And Sullivan and Son, we were told we're getting a 3-year pickup. We all went out and bought cars. And then the person who told us that, Michael White, he got to be a great guy, got to be president of Lionsgate. And a new guy came in, canceled the show without even talking to Warner Brothers, So that was a shock. And again, the one I did in Toronto, I love Toronto, Hoop Life. We were on Sunday nights, and one night we were the lowest rated show on television, but we reran on Tuesday night. And on Tuesday night, we would win the night, especially for Showtime. So I said, well, that's a no-brainer. Next year we come back on Tuesday night. They canceled it because of ratings.
There's no rhyme or reason to it. How do you deal with that disappointment?
Well, for me, it's a little easier than most actors because I I love going back to the theater. So I've done over 50 plays, just like Charlie Durning. Charlie Durning told me if I ever went a year without doing a play, he'd never speak to me again. So I've never gone, even during COVID. So I go back to the theater, you know. I mean, so I look at it in some ways as a little bit of a blessing. I can get to work on, like Charlie Durning said, another 20 years, I'll be an actor. So,
Wow. I think his math was a bit wrong, but I got to tell you that it's very healthy that you do have that plan B because you love the theater so much and it keeps you going, it keeps you vitalized. Now, two of your funniest movies, Dan, are Stakeout and Another Stakeout. How much of the dialogue in those movies was ad-libbed?
well, not so much ad lib, but the writer, James Knopf, he loved the game that Richard Dreyfuss and I would play. I'd come in and yell out a line from an old movie, and Richard would say the actor who did the line and all that.
Well, when you
Like,
said, I think I broke my zipper, was that ad-libbed?
no, that's a line I stole from Husbands with Peter. Peter Falk was a good friend of mine. And I always try to get a line that either Charlie Durning or Peter said in a movie. Later on, even Jack, and that was an ad lib. Yeah, yeah. I got to tell you a great story. We would go to dinner quite often. It would be Charlie Durning, Jack Klugman, Peter Falk, and Dom DeLuise and I. Sometimes I would actually ask a young writer to come or a good friend like Wendy Malick so I could hear the same stories all over again. Tell them about this one. You don't want to hear about that. Yeah, I did. And they tell the same story. So Jack and I were doing a great play, The Value of Names by Jeffrey Sweet, about the House Un-American Activities Committee, three-hander. And we had Monday and Tuesday off. Sunday, in the audience is Charles Durning, Dom DeLuise, and Peter Falk. And Jack Klugman comes running into my room and says, all right, now don't do it for them. We got to do it for us. Don't get. And I go, Jack, what are you going to do? Shave my head and send me back to Nam? Come on. They're our friends. I'm looking forward to it. He goes, you're right. You're right. So we went out and we just had one of those special nights, in the theater, no matter, like Jack said, we're always good, but there's those nights. And we had one of those. And while we're bowing, Jack says, we got to get the boys together, find out what the hell we did right tonight. So Tuesday night, we go to dinner. Great stories. And Charlie, very emotionally, he puts his arm around me. And he said, all right, another 10 years, you'll be an actor.
Oh,
I won the Academy Award. And the great Jack Klugman leans over and looks at the great Charles Durning and says, Charlie, are you an actor yet? And Charles Durning leaned in, he put his fingers close, and he said, Jack, I'm getting there. See, it was a whole different mindset. They never talked about good or bad. They talked about choices. I don't try to judge myself on, was I good tonight? Like Jack says, we're always good. We'll always give the people their money's worth. But did we make the right choice?
well, I'm telling you, I wish I could have been a fly on the wall when you had some of those dinners. Let me tell you.
You would have enjoyed them, Harvey. Yeah.
Oh my Lord, I would have enjoyed it. And I would have made notes, believe me. Now in
They would have been
1998,
on your show, They all would
oh,
have been on your show.
would I have loved to have started this show early enough to get all of those men you mentioned and Wendy Malick on my show. Now, in 1998, you appeared in a movie called Wide Awake, directed by M. Night Shyamalan.
Yeah.
And I've heard you say in interviews that because of the casting, the whole tone of that film changed from what you understood it to be when you read the script to what we ended up seeing on the screen. So, Dan, how often would you say in your career has a movie ended up being a missed opportunity because of the wrong casting?
Well, that has to do with packaging, Harvey. See, once Bill Knight, he got signed with a very big agency. All the casting for the good roles are going to come from that agency. And if they push somebody, like we did the initial reading and we had great act. Charles Durning read the Robert Lozier part. my good friend Joe Montaigne read the lead guy. And then
you had Mercedes Ruehl.
Mercedes Ruehl read The Nun. So when they put it together, they put Rosie O'Donnell in, who I love. She's a great lady, but known for comedy. It changed the tone of the movie. Now, the part I did was given to Joe Morton, but when they were shooting, Joe was on another movie that didn't finish in time. So Knight called me and said, would you fly to Philadelphia and do it? And I went, and of course I did a nice part of the priest. But I told Knight, I said, you got to watch it when you have leads, there's a tone that comes in. And I thought they missed the boat on that, but it turned out well. He went with the right agency, made some big movies with big names.
Well, it's an interesting thing as a movie fan to understand what you're talking about, that it could have been a very different movie with different actors in those roles. Obviously, Mercedes Ruehl is nothing like Rosie O'Donnell.
No, there would have been, I thought the movie had a very serious tone to it. It's a little boy who you realize at the end he's looking for God, and God's been with him all the time. But with Rosie and Dennis, it became a comedy.
Over the course of your career, you've played a number of very interesting real people. And I got the pleasure in 2011 to see you playing the renowned football coach, NFL executive Vince Lombardi. Your portrayal was so uncanny that you blew everybody away. How did you prepare for that role?
Well, that was easy. One, I was a jock when I was younger. I played football, but also I had such great help from the NFL, the Mara family. They, if I wanted to talk to Bart Starr 10 minutes later, he was on the phone, and I had Judith Light. I had a great cast, Keith, Bill, Chris, Rob, they were wonderful. But I also had Judith Light. And the reason why the show was so successful is it was the one show the wife could get the couch potato husband off the couch and go see, because they thought it was going to be about football. But it was the wives that were calling the other wives saying, he'll go see it, but you're going to love it. Wait till you see Judith Light. So, Judith is something special. And we had Tommy Kail directing. He went on to direct a little thing called Hamilton after that, So,
I got to tell you, the chemistry between you and Judith Light was pure magic. And I know that Lombardi was only supposed to run for 10 weeks, but it ran for 10 months. You must be so proud of that.
Oh yeah. We were not accepted by the Broadway community. Matter of fact, we had one critic who came in. He came 3 times and criticized the audience. What are these people doing with Packer shirts on? And whereas Tommy Kail and I thought it was a great thing for theater. We were bringing in new people. They were enjoying it. I remember when the Miami Dolphins football team came, nobody told them it was in assigned seats. So it was in a round. So they all sat in the first row. They were too big to sit up, and nobody had the courage to go say, hey, you got to move. It took us a half hour to get started. But when it was over, went out, did a Q&A with them. And one of the players said, are all the theaters in a circle like this? And we said, no, this is the only one. And I said, is this your first Broadway play? And he said, this is my first play ever. I've never seen a play. He couldn't believe we did it 8 times a week. And
the Broadway community should have embraced your show, because
I thought so too.
The notion that you could generate new audience members, renewed interest in the theater, is something that very, very few shows have been able to do.
I know. But matter of fact, we only had one nomination, Judith. Tommy Kail, who the year before won Best Play Within the Heights, but didn't win Best Director. We thought for sure he was going to get nominated and win. And even our lighting designer and our sound designer didn't get nominated. They were multi Tony Award winners. So we were, I was a little disappointed by that. But, it's just part of the business. It's like when you were talking about a show that's successful, like Pitch, and Dan Fogelman and I will never understand why that was canceled, but It's just part of the business. It's a hard business, and it's harder now than ever before because of the technology.
I just don't know how you can maintain respect for people that make the decisions when they have very, very poor judgment so often.
Well, yeah. But again, I was lucky. I had Charles Durning, and how he tried to convince our union of this. It's never been about money on their end. They got more money than God. It's about power. And when you have the power, you exercise it. And right now, whoever owns the editing machine in film and television has the power. And that machine diminishes talent, and on stage now, it's so expensive for the average person to go to a play that the power now lies in a lot of the technical things, bubblegum shows. You're really paying for a concert instead of a play. And there's things they could do to help, but they don't want to do them. Like right now, I was at a meeting. I suggested that the state of New York give every Broadway theater owner and off-Broadway theater owner, they pay no property tax, but no ticket can be sold for more than $150.
What a great idea.
Yeah, everybody would benefit, but they don't want to hear that.
That's a shame. That's a great idea. Now, back to Lombardi. Was there ever any talk of making it into a movie or a miniseries?
There was talk about it, and for a while, Robert De Niro wanted to do it, and a 2-hour movie, which I thought wasn't a good idea, and it never happened anyway. I'm sure Robert De Niro didn't think it was that good an idea. But I always thought it would be a great mini series with someone like Mark Ruffalo playing Lombardi younger and De Niro playing him older, because it's a big story.
What about you playing him older?
Oh, I've been around long enough to know they're not going to sell that many tickets, but with Robert De Niro, Coach Lombardi would get his due, I'm sure.
I would be first in line to buy a ticket, Mr. Dan Lauria.
Well, it's good to know I fooled you, Harvey. Thank you.
Now, in 2004, you played TV network executive Fred Silverman in a TV movie called Behind the Camera, The Unauthorized Story of Charlie's Angels. Did Mr. Silverman ever tell you what he thought of your performance?
Yes, it was. I had after the Wonder Years, I produced a couple of plays. One of them was A Bronx Tale. So De Niro's company bought it from me. And I didn't want to keep doing that. So Charlie talked me into setting up a reading series where every Monday night we read a new play to help writers get literary agents. And Fred Silverman had come a couple of times, and we put him on our board. He was one of the greatest. Boy, you want to know the history of television. I think he's the only one who was president of all 3 networks at one point. And when this project came up, he said, I want Dan Lauria to play me. So that's how I got that job.
And he was happy.
I love going to dinner with him and Charlie Durning. They knew every show ever made,
You also played CIA Director George Tenet in a TV miniseries called The Path to 9/11. That was a very powerful movie. Is that one of your favorite projects?
Well, it was a great character to play. Again, I don't see the final project. I know as an actor, there were some great moments in there that I had. It's like with Reagan, the scene I had with Dennis where Tip O'Neill goes to see Reagan after he's shot. Scenes like that can really fall flat if the actors aren't committed to doing it, And Dennis, we are 180 degrees apart on our politics. He was a great Reagan, and it was easy for me to identify with Tip O'Neill. But when it came to work, it was about getting the scene right. And Dennis was great to work with.
That was a great, great scene. What about in 2009? You played Jimmy Hoffa off Broadway in Good Bobby. How did you prepare for that role?
Well, my father was a Teamster. And I remember when I was younger, I asked my father, are you going to vote for Hoffa? And he said, yes. And I said, well, Dad, he may be a crook. And my father said, I don't care. I'm getting a good salary, I'm getting a vacation, you're eating 3 meals a day. Kept that in mind. And his son came, and I went, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. But his son came back and hugged me and said, my father would have loved what you did. And
That's
that
the best compliment you could ever get.
totally agree. Because you got to remember, Hoffa was loved by the union people, the people he represented. And I had a great director. And my entrance into the committee, with Robert Kennedy, House Un-American Activities Committee, when Hoffa came in, he let me come right down the aisle, and I said hello to everybody in the audience. Hey, how are you? Because that's what it was like. He walked in, and all the Teamsters in that room applauded, yelled out, go get him, Jimmy. It was like a 3-ring circus, and he was the master of ceremonies.
Did you watch The Irishman?
Yes. Yeah, I thought they should have ended it a half hour sooner.
You talked about the importance of editing.
Yeah, they should have ended that movie when Joe Pesci says to De Niro when they were in jail, you see, I warned you about this. And they should have just froze on his face instead of adding that half hour where you didn't know who the people were. But hey, who am I to tell Martin Scorsese what to? I would love to sit with him one day and talk about old films.
Oh, wow. That would be amazing. I was looking at all the real people you've played. You also played NASA Administrator James Webb in the TV miniseries From the Earth to the Moon. That was directed by Tom Hanks. So then I wanted to see if you had ever acted with Tom Hanks, but I don't think you have.
No. I'll tell you all the stories you hear about Tom Hanks and how nice he is. Well, in real life, he's even nicer. He is just one of the most gracious people I've ever worked with. And he was a great director. He would come up, what do you think, Dan? What do you think? And I'd say something. And then we had a table around the conference. We had a scene around a conference table. Al Franken was in it. And when it was all over at the next day I walked in, he said, Dan, we can print every take of you. And I looked at him and I said, yeah, okay. And he goes, we usually don't do that. I said, well, I had a great teacher, Charles Durning. He said, he taught you well. So that was a great compliment.
That is a great compliment. But
yeah.
I have to say that when you feel the influence of someone like Charles Durning, which is so imprinted on your soul, do you feel his presence with you still?
Every minute of every day.
I can tell.
Yeah.
I can tell. And when you play a real person, I mean, you've played, you mentioned Tip O'Neill. Mm-hmm. You even played the Pope in American comedy. When you're playing, when you play a real person, do you feel
that was a slapstick thing? That was funny. If anything, I watched a couple of Marx Brothers movies and had a couple of Grouchos in there.
But when you do play a real person, like Tip O'Neill,
yeah,
or the NASA director James Webb, do you feel a certain pressure or responsibility to honor their memory and the way you deliver that performance?
Yeah, but in a lot of ways, it's easier, like especially with Lombardi, because there were so many people that I could talk to who knew him. And I would always ask the Packer players, what do you want to see when you come see me in the play that's not in the books? I can read the books. More than half said his sense of humor. And after a while, I went to Tommy Kail and I said, we got to find a couple of places where he laughs very loudly. And I told Tommy what the Packer players had said. And Tommy being, he's the best stage director I ever worked with. He said, you're right. We owe it to him. Let's find it. And we looked for it. And we found a couple of places where he had that broad laugh, So when you're playing a real character, the more you can talk to the people who actually talk to that person and look at film. There's a lot of film on Tip O'Neill that I didn't even know existed till I had the part. And you just watch it, and you pick up physical things like Tip O'Neill had a broad laugh, but his teeth never showed, and there were other things about him. He, like Lombardi, they've always carried a rosary beads in their pocket, their coat pocket. So, you do things like that.
Well, you do it well. Now, of course, you don't think you're going to get away with an interview with me without being asked about Shameless. You played a very interesting
I,
character, a Republican congressman by the name of Mo White.
yeah.
We had the wonderful William H. Macy on our show a few months ago. What was it like working with William H. Macy and the cast of Shameless?
Oh, it was. I don't. Well, you met William H. You can't be a better actor than Bill. And when I first got the script, it was the way it was written. It was a little bit more stagey. And I said to Bill, if we're both going to go out on a limb, I don't know if it's going to work. I said, you want me to play the straight man? And then Bill, to his credit, I mean, he's the star of the show. I'm a supporting actor. I'll do whatever the lead wants me to do. And Bill came back and said, Dan, I think it would be better if you do the exaggerated thing. And then they cut to me, it just in shock. So we kind of reversed. We didn't change any of the words, but we reversed the way it was written. And Bill, being the pro he is, he knew what he was doing because his reactions are stealing the show. I'm out there saying the most outlandish things and enjoying it. I'm not playing a politician. I'm really, and the further I went out, the less Bill did, but just as shock. And that's why it worked.
So. Yeah, your episodes were really, really entertaining. I have to ask you also, in 2009, you made a bizarre little sci-fi thriller movie called Alien Trespass. Oh. It was like a spoof of all those 1950s horror sci-fi movies. Are you surprised that the movie became such a cult classic?
I am not. I don't know why they didn't let that direct. He wanted to do another spoof on film noir after that. I couldn't wait, but the movie didn't do well when it came out, but now everybody, and Eric McCormick was just great in that. The problem was you had to know the movies from the 1950s where the screen in the back is not moving at the right pace with the man walking in front of it. We deliberately did that in the movie. And Charlie Durning loved it. That was, he said, this may be the funniest thing you've ever done. And we weren't playing it funny. We were playing it like they did in the 50s. But it's caught on a little bit now. I was so happy for the director and the writer because it was a good, but that was fun to do.
Yeah. It was a very, very entertaining popcorn movie. You just, just loved it. So, Dan, I want to read you something that you said in an interview a few years ago that really struck me. You said, I'm quoting you here, our business is like every other business. 15% of the people I work with are total assholes, and 85% are just the best people in the world who work hard and put their all into what they're creating. The only difference between our business and the other businesses is that our business chooses to promote the 15%. So, Dan, have you ever figured out why that happens in this business?
I don't know. I guess they figure bad news sells more tickets than good news. But I've been very fortunate with the people I've known, and they just the nicest. Somebody like Peter Falk. Of course, everybody knows Columbo, but he was such a dedicated actor. So was Jack Klugman. Matter of fact, you couldn't have people more opposite. Jack Klugman and Peter Falk, they obsessed about everything. Dan, is it funnier if I move the glass here or should I move it over here? Pete, just move the glass. One night, Charlie Durning said, Pete, if acting was that hard, Dan and I wouldn't do it. So it's people don't realize that. They think Peter Falk ad-lib thing, especially with the John Cassavetes movies, but that's not true. John would work with him and the cast, Ben Gazzara and Jenna. They would ad-lib the day before, but then he would come back in and it was written down and we stuck to what he wrote, so.
But we couldn't tell. It looked so seamless and it looked so spontaneous. Yes. And so authentic that we can't tell.
Yeah.
Well, there's another thing you said in an interview a few years ago that really impressed me. You said, The people I like working with best are the people who know that it's called a play for a reason. We're supposed to be playing.
Yes.
So, Dan, given all the financial pressures, the rushed atmosphere on the set when you're making a movie or a TV show, do you think a lot of people in the industry have forgotten how to have fun on the job?
Oh, well, I think they've forgotten the art. You got to remember 90% of what we see on television or movies are talking head. Whereas you go back to the old movies, if you and I were in a scene, it would be left in one. The both of us would be in the screen. So we're creating the timing. We're creating the pace of the show. And everybody has to be good if we're not going to cut. The dolly grip that moved the camera back then, how to move it at the right pace. The focuser had to be great. You never see the shadow of the boom. Everybody has to be good. That's filmmaking, that's directing, that's acting, that's writing. But now when I cut from your head to my head, nobody has to be good. If you do it 5 or 6 times, I'm sure one of them is going to be okay. So where's the art gone? And the businessmen don't care about the art. They care about business, making their stockholders money.
Well, there's another thing about you that I really feel so warmly about, and that is that I know this about you, that you really care about being in a positive working environment, because I read that you were the one who told the producers to pull the plug on your TV show Costello, even though the show was a hit.
Yeah, David was the president of Warner Brothers. I knew him when he was working at Cannell. Our lead kind of went off the deep end, and because we had good ratings and everything, and she was being impossible to work with. And David came in and said, "What's going on, Dan?" And I just said, "Life's too short." And he said, "Yeah, but Dan, you got good numbers." And I said, "Life's too short." And he said, "Really?" I said, "Life's too short, David. We don't want to do this." And they pulled the plug. I'm not saying it was just because of me, but I sure as hell didn't help. And then who turns out to be the president of Warner Brothers when we're shooting Sullivan and Son? David, he comes in and the first day welcomes us to Warner Brothers and said, "Now listen, if I want to know anything that's going on, I'm talking to Dan. He's the only guy I know who killed a hit show right to my face." It came back to haunt me, But I told him after 1 week of Sullivan and Son, you don't worry about us. This is the most fun set I've ever been on, the most creative people. And we ran 3 years and we had no deficit spending because they pre-sold Australia. So we were shocked we didn't get, and they told us we were going to get picked up for 3 more years. So even David, the president of Warner Brothers, said, I was shocked when TBS pulled the plug.
There's no logic to it. There's no predictability to it. And yet somehow you have remained so humble, so happy, so balanced, so grounded. I really want to thank Charles Durning for the influence he's had on your life. It has been such a pleasure meeting you, Dan, having this chance to chat with you about your amazing life and career. I hope you write a book one day.
Wow. Well,
I know you've written children's books, but I mean a memoir.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you enough stories. We'll put it together to get. All right.
Oh, the next time I come to New York, I'm telling you, I want to go out for dinner and hear every single story that got told at all those dinners.
Yeah. Oh, that you would hear, like when Jack Klugman finally met his idol. He was with John Garfield when he met Lee J. Cobb. They were going to work on the revival of Golden Boy, and Jack couldn't speak, And then when Lee J. Cobb left, John Garfield looked at him and said, 2 schmucks. He wants to be the movie star I am, and I want to be the actor he is.
Now that's a moment.
Yes.
That is a moment. Well, I got to tell you, Dan, thank you for all the great performances. Thank you for the time you took to appear on our show. I loved every moment of our time together.
Yeah. Next time we'll talk a little bit more about Toronto, working with Sir John Neville. That was a trip.
I'd like to do that in Toronto. Come visit.
Yeah. Okay.
Our guest has been the iconic actor and writer, Dan Lauria. My name is Harvey Brownstone. Thank you all for joining us. See you next time. Thank you to my producer Steve Silver, my managers Rick Marcelli and Robin Bragg Marcelli at the Marcelli Company in Hollywood, my director of programming Robert Monaghan, my PR directors Eileen Shapiro and Jimmy Starr, and my entire team at the XPTV1 network in the UK.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out all the great interviews on the Harvey Brownstone Interviews YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified when new videos are posted.